the Hartland Township Planning Commission meeting of January 4th, 2014. We'd like to begin this evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Commissioner Hopkins, would you please take roll?
Certainly. Commissioner Voigt?
Here.
Commissioner Murphy? Here. Commissioner Mitchell is absent. Commissioner Grissom is absent. Commissioner Hopkins here. Commissioner Newsom? Here. Chairperson Fox?
Here.
We have quorum of the Planning Commission. We also have present Township Planning Director Dave Campbell.
All right. Item 4, approval of our meeting agenda.
I move to approve the meeting agenda for January 9th, 2014 as presented.
Support that.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Newsom, a second from Commissioner Voigt. Are there any changes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item 5, approval of meeting minutes.
I move to approve the Planning Commission meeting minutes of December 19th, 2013.
Support.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Hopkins, a second from Commissioner Newsom. Are there any changes? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next up, item 6 is election of officers. We do this the first meeting of the year. There are 3 positions. We have secretary, vice chair, and chair. And typically what would happen is we would entertain a motion in a second for that particular agenda item.
Well, to prevent from dragging this out any further than we need to, and to maintain the leadership and stability that we've had over the last couple of years, I would like to make a motion to maintain the structure of the leaders that we've had and the officers and the positions that they have for 2013 to be the same for 2014.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Next up, item 7, call to the public. Anyone have anything this evening? Seeing none, we'll go past item 8, public hearing. We'll move on to item 9A. This is Taco Bell. It's a revised site plan with application number 520. The applicant was here a few weeks ago, went through a first pass, had a few minor adjustments to make to the plan, so they're back here this evening. And we have a letter from our Planning Department dated January 6th outlining the 4 open issues, and I was wondering if maybe we could have Dave give us a brief intro into where we're going, and then maybe we'll have the applicant come up and we'll go through the 4 points. So, Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. Hopefully you did all receive, either via email or via your hard copy packets, the Planning Department's review letter dated January 6th, as well as all the supplemental materials that went with it. I will say that with the combination of the New Year's holiday and then the inclement weather we had earlier this week, the Planning Department was delayed in getting this out, and I appreciate the cooperation of the Planning Commission and also the applicant and their representatives in working with us and being able to pull it together as quick as we could given the situation. I will say the applicant and his representatives were very responsive in getting us what we needed on relatively short notice, so that I do appreciate that. The Planning Commission did receive a first review letter from the Planning Department looking at the originally submitted site plan that the Planning Commission saw during the meeting of December 19th for the Taco Bell proposal. And based on the feedback from the Planning Commission that the applicant received at the December 19th meeting, the applicants had an opportunity to revise their plans and resubmit them, which they did, along with a cover letter kind of going over the changes between the first and the revised plans. The January 6th letter that you received in your packets is a review of that resubmittal. Keep in mind that a couple things have been in motion since then, particularly as it pertains to the site lighting. So we'll address those things that have changed since this review letter got sent out. For the benefit of the audience and the folks who weren't here on December 19th, if you look up on the screen, this area here, the big white building is Meyer. Obviously, along the left side is US 23, and along the bottom is M59. The big building is Meyer, just to give you your bearings. And the proposed Taco Bell is proposed in this area right here, on the north side of M59, west of Hartland Road. As I mentioned, the application appeared before the Planning Commission on December 19th. There were, in the original review letter submitted by the Planning Department, there were, I believe, 13 items that the Planning Commission needed to consider and make a determination on. Those 13 items have been whittled down to 4 because the applicant has worked with the Planning Commission and the Planning Department to resolve the other items that have dropped off of that list. The first of the remaining 4 items to be addressed at the Planning Commission tonight involves the parking lot lighting for the proposed site. If you'll bear with me, I'll get to the what is now has since been proposed since the revised site plan application was submitted in late December. So on the revised plan set that you received in your packet, this is the light fixture that was proposed. This is a shoebox-style metal halide fixture that is generally consistent with the parking lot lighting that's required for the overall Hartland Town Square development. Subsequent to the submittal, though, the applicant was able to identify a similar fixture that is an LED fixture. This one here. Again, shoebox style, matte black, which is required by the development agreement. It is slightly different than the model that's shown in the pattern book that went along with the development agreement. Notably, these vents along the side. So the first item that the Planning Department wishes to see the Planning Commission address is whether or not this LED shoebox fixture is consistent with the spirit and the intent of the pattern book and could be deemed an acceptable alternative to the shoebox style fixture that's specifically required in the pattern book for Hartland Town Square. The second outstanding item has to do with the landscaping for the proposed development, so bear with me while I get back to their landscaping plan. So, in particular, this area along the south side of Hartland Square Drive and what would be the northeast corner of their site has been changed at the direction of the Planning Commission to establish more of a hedgerow along the Hartland Square Drive as a buffer between the road and the parking and drive-through area behind it. The species of landscaping has been altered in an attempt to address the comments of the Planning Commission at the December 19th meeting, and the location and spacing of the species has changed. They've also relocated some other plantings over to this side next to the proposed monument sign. If and when the Planning Commission is prepared to have a discussion specifically on landscaping, Sue Grissom, a Planning Commission member who was out of state and not able to join us tonight, emailed some comments regarding the landscaping, and hopefully we can have a discussion with the applicant of all comments that the Planning Commission might have, but in particular Ms. Grissom's comments. So the second item still to be addressed is whether or not the Planning Commission feels that the landscaping plan, revised landscaping plan submitted is consistent with the comments that the Planning Commission provided to the applicant at the December 19th meeting. The third outstanding item is the building elevations, and more in particular the don't appear to have elevations. Thank you. So in particular, there was a good bit of discussion among the Planning Commission regarding, and these are some pictures from a comparable Taco Bell that's just opened in Romulus. In particular, there was discussion among the Planning Commissions of this slat wall system, which is proposed along the south and west elevations of the proposed Hartland Taco Bell, including whether the illuminated purple element behind these slats could be considered a dissonant color that would be inconsistent with the zoning ordinance, and also whether the illumination, the level of the illumination and the nature of the illumination is consistent with the lighting requirements of the Hartland Township zoning ordinance. So that's a matter that we would need to see the Planning Commission resolve this evening as part of any motion. And the fourth item that the Planning Department would like to see resolved would be a resolution of the outstanding items noted by the respective reviews of the Department of Public Works, the Fire Marshal, and the Township Engineer if and when this project gets to construction plans. So in general, the January 6th letter of the Planning Department recommends that the Planning Commission grant a recommendation of approval to the Township Board, who ultimately has approval authority. Our recommendation is that this body, the Planning Commission, grant that recommendation subject to resolution of those four items that I just went over. I know the applicant and his representatives are here this evening to answer any questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Great. So maybe what we could do is, like we did last time, if you'd like to come up, we can cover the 4 points and see where we can go.
Okay. I'm Eric Iverson with Design Inc., and we represent Sundance Inc., where they're engineers.
Okay, thank you. So if we take a look at the Planning Department's letter of January 6th, the first item is the determination by the Planning Commission on whether the LED shoebox-style light fixture proposed is consistent with the fixture required in the pattern book. So, anything you'd like to add?
The dimensions of the box, the shoe box itself, are about the same as the other one that's on our plan. Now, if you notice the vents on the side of that, we had a discussion, could metal halide fixture be retrofitted for LED lighting? Well, if you look at this fixture, it actually has heat vents in it because LED lights lose their intensity and their light if they get overheated. And when you have a very bright light like this is, they have to add vents in it, and actually in cooler climates, it's just a natural convection where they have openings in the bottom of the fixture and the air just goes through, kind of like your roof vent does, in your house without power. But in the warmer climates, they actually have a fan in there and actually suck the air through it. So, in general, you can't retrofit the metal halide fixture. You have to replace the whole fixture to the LED. I didn't know that at the last meeting, but I know it now. So, so we believe that that although it's slightly different, that it would meet the intent of the shoebox in the pattern book, and they just asked for approval of it.
Okay. Comments or questions on that?
I just have a question. We've got in the packet here, you've got a sheet that shows that some of these are adjustable. Are you putting the fixed mounted one like this, or the adjustable?
Yeah, this is the fixture. That particular fixture is the one that we're using on a pole, mounted. It's got a little arm on it. I don't think that shows the arm. So
it's going to be fixed position.
Yeah, it'll look.
There you go, like that.
Yeah, you can see the arm on the back of it there. So it'll be mounted, it has an arm that comes off the pole. That's it right there.
I think it's worth noting the same height as has always been proposed, 27.5 feet, same number of fixtures, generally in the same location as what we saw on December 19th.
And the lighting plan numbers.
Yes.
We look at the
The
numbers
photometric
on the
numbers.
photometric
Yeah,
plan. How are
actually,
they comparing?
When compared to the metal halide fixture, it drops slightly. The lighting levels drop slightly, but they're still within the, they don't go below the minimum level in the ordinance. So it just, it wouldn't be noticeable to the normal eye, but the numbers change slightly downward from the metal halide.
Okay.
So last time we met, we had some areas that were over the minimum, maximum allowed. We've addressed all those in the new plan?
Yeah, I believe the maximum now doesn't go over 10. I realize this is sideways, but the maximum doesn't go over 10, which is the zoning ordinance requirement, and the lighting levels along the property lines are minimal.
I just had a question about the photometric plan that's in our packet. Is this the one with the LED lighting?
There was two of them in there. One of them was on our plan sheet, and that was the metal halide fixture that was on our plan. And let me show you. And this is in color, but this is what you have is a black and white copy of this. This plan right here is for the metal halide. But we also submitted separately a PDF file that just came from the lighting supplier that was the LED shoebox photometric grid. So we have both grids are in the package. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
If we're talking about the LED grid, it's the separate sheet that doesn't have title block.
The most revised and the one that's now proposed came in and had to be included as a kind of a separate exhibit because it came in after the plans were submitted. And again, in an effort to just keep on track and keep this on the agenda, it was a separate exhibit.
Does this include all of the building lighting then?
Yes.
Because they're aware of all the lighting that's going on?
Yes, it includes all the lights on the building.
Okay. This is a complete photometric plan with all the lighting for your site?
Yes.
Measured 5 feet off the ground.
Yes.
To the standard?
To our standard, our requirements. Are there any other questions or comments on the lighting? On this particular lighting item?
Is the one that you proposed 3 weeks ago, or whatever it was, you had said that one was met our standards as far as
It was called a full cutoff fixture, yes.
Is that the exact same fixture that is used in the Romulus one?
Yes.
Because that in the Romulus store, those lights throw an awful lot of light glare sideways, in my opinion. And I just, LED's a different animal than what we're used to. And I just wonder, this compared to that one, are we looking at as much sideways light as those ones seem to throw off if they're both fully cut off?
Yeah, I don't have a picture of that fixture, but my recollection is the lens on that one kind of wraps around the side a little bit. I suspect that might, the cutoff means that the top is 100% covered. That's the full cutoff. Now, when that lens wraps around the side, it probably can throw some light out sideways also. Now, if you look at this fixture, and of course it's not the LED one, but it's got the box goes right down to the bottom here, so it's impossible for it to throw anything sideways. It has to come out of the bottom of the lens and then work it, it's going to work out. So that would be my suspicion. I haven't seen that fixture personally. I haven't been to Romulus yet. I was going to take my daughter there on Sunday night. I live in Lansing. I was going to drive all the way to Romulus and take her to Taco Bell before she went back to school. And then it's like, there ain't no way we're going, sweetie. So
Well, and I think the other thing for those that did see Romulus, their lighting levels in Romulus are substantially higher than what's being proposed here. When we asked to see the lighting levels of Romulus to Hartland's proposed Taco Bell, the numbers were half or less.
Yeah, their requirement in Romulus, they mount the fixtures low. We had a maximum of 14 feet tall, and then they have a minimum level in the parking lot and walkways of 3-foot candles. So that's the minimum that we can put in the parking lot, and then they have a maximum of 10. And so we had 13 fixtures there, whereas here we only have 7. So we almost had twice as many fixtures. And the lighting levels, if you look at the photometric plan, just remember their numbers are on the ground surface, not 5 feet up. So it's at 5 feet up, it's even brighter yet, where your eye is. But the photometric plan, I mean, it was twice as bright, basically. If you looked at the average foot candles, it was 5.5 or so, and these were at, I think, 2.5, close to 2.5 for our average.
Yeah.
And all those airplanes flying around, you got to...
Yeah, and I'm thinking we were surprised because I think their ordinance is related. They probably grabbed the lighting specification out of the airport's lighting specification is all I could figure. So, but anyway.
It is lit like a runway. Any other questions on the LED light fixture, shoebox light fixture proposed? Agreement with it? Can you work with it? Can you?
I'm glad they were able to find the shoebox with the LED, because that's what we were looking for, is maintain the shoebox style and definitely more greener if we can be.
The downside of it, the initial cost is about 3 times what the other fixture would be. But
lower, less maintenance.
But Sundance is committed to. I mean, they made the switch. The other lights are even more expensive than the standard shoebox. The ones that you saw at Romulus are more expensive also. So I mean, they made the commitment to go to LED and want to stay that way.
Unfortunately, they only have to put 7 in.
There you go.
Well, we appreciate it.
Tom, you okay? Yep. Okay, so we'll put point 1 as the proposed LED shoebox light fixture is consensus, it's acceptable. Item 2 is determination by the Planning Commission of whether the frontage, landscaping, and hedgerow proposed along Hartland Square Drive satisfies the intent of the pattern book for the Hartland Town Square plan development and is consistent with the direction provided by the Planning Commission at our December 19th, 2013 meeting, particularly with respect to the quantity and location of plantings. Dave?
So I guess let's start with a reminder of what they did between the first plan and the revised plan. One of the recommendations of the Planning Commission was to add some foundation landscaping around the building where possible, and to do that they added landscaping along the sidewalk, along the south side of the building and the west side of the building. One of the recommendations was to relocate these, are they Colorado spruce trees? Closer to the property line so that when they do grow into big healthy trees, they're not then growing out into the drive-through lane and the circulation lane. As it pertains to the hedgerow, the recommendation was to add more evergreen plantings, replace some of what were proposed as daylilies in some locations with more shrubs. So in looking at the quantities proposed, the quantity of shrub plantings has not changed from the first submittal, but the types of species and in some cases the locations has changed. They're proposing the yews along, what is Q? Okay, so a row of the yews along juniper. Right, the juniper. Okay, so the row of junipers along this corner with the yews behind us to screen the dumpster. The intent of the yews is to create that hedgerow as required. with 3 U's proposed over here on the west side of the driveway, which was a recommendation of the Planning Commission to get more of a hedgerow established on this side to better screen this side of the parking lot. I believe at least one more ornamental tree was added.
Right there, right where your
Yeah,
cursor is.
right there. And in the case of this area, some daylilies were replaced with boxwood shrubs. I guess maybe if we could start, Mr. Iverson, with, is there anything I'm missing here as far as the changes to the landscaping plan? Changes being those from the plan that the Planning Commission saw on December 19th and the one that we had before us tonight.
Change the trees along the roadway. The nursery to match the rest of the pattern book. Yeah.
They had originally proposed arborvitae and boxwood, I believe, and in the interest of keeping the plantings along the Hartland Square Drive similar within the development, we asked that they match the plant materials. So the arborvitaes went away, the boxwoods went away, and I think that's where you've now picked up this.
Yeah, and that is exactly correct. My recollection of the meeting, I had to go, I went back, I did all the stuff real quick the next day so that we get the plan back and submitted in, just knowing that the holidays were coming. And then, but I didn't know that your meetings you have video on your website. So I stumbled across that 2 days ago, so I had to watch the whole video just to make sure, well, did you get everything? So, I'm keeping track up here, and I'm 54, and I forget things. So, I think I got my belief is that I got the intent of everything that was discussed after I looked at the video. I reconfirmed that. But my recollection of the discussion was that the trees along the right-of-way there, that we had enough numbers up there, but we just, Commissioner Grissom wanted some of them moved over to the other side, and then the species were to change. And so that was what I assumed was wanted. Now, David, I think, talked about Commissioner Grissom's email to the revised plan, and if I read her email, we will take care of, with one exception. I would like to change one item on it, but we'll do what you ask us to do, of course. But I believe that we...
with us, because we don't know what Commissioner Grissom...
Right, so, here. So, her recommendations, having had a chance to read the landscape plan, were she thought there was a large number of mulch beds that could be better planted. In particular, this mulch bed, she thought that there was opportunity for some additional daylilies in this mulch bed. Back here screening the transformer, and I believe she said within this area around the menu board as well. In general, she just wants to, anywhere there's an opportunity to replace a large area of mulch with some daylilies, she would like to see that happen. In particular, and I think Mr. Iverson wants to speak to this one especially, this relatively narrow parking lot island between the drive-through lane and the dumpster pad. This is proposed to just be mulched, likely because it's too narrow to really establish grass or sod in there. But she would like to at least see some daylilies planted in there to give it some greenery. In addition to the daylily comments, to kind of fill in the mulch beds as much as possible, she felt that the spacing of the evergreen plantings, the yews and the boxwoods along this hedgerow, she'd like to see those spaced no more than 4 feet apart, so that you get more of a hedgerow look to it as opposed to individual plantings that are spaced out a little bit. So her recommendation was to not only tighten up the spacing between those plantings, but in doing so, increase the number of plantings so that you get a continuous hedgerow as opposed to having space in between them, and in so doing a more effective screening of both the parking lot and the dumpster enclosure.
if I could make a comment about that. Commissioner Grissom last meeting specifically said she doesn't know why we're trying to screen an attractive-looking brick enclosure. She specifically said that. And she did. When I read her email, David, she said she wants some space closer, but she didn't anywhere say to add more. Now, but my suggestion is, since the dumpster enclosure doesn't need to be screened, is that the plantings that are on the east side of the dumpster slide around, and we tighten them all up along the roadway, which is what the hedgerow was along the roadway. And so we can meet what she wants with the hedgerow along the roadway by just sliding all those U's around and planting them to 5 feet apart, 4 or 5 feet apart, whatever number she said. And so that was my intentions of meeting her request, is to slide the U's that are on the east side around to the road side of the dumpster enclosure. We'll pull them even further to the west, almost to the tree. And then all that area where the U's are will just turn into sodded area. It won't be mulched. So that was my idea to handle comments.
It seems like if they're 4 feet, I don't know what the scale is there, but probably putting them 4 feet apart, you probably don't need to put more than about 2 or 3 of them around the front side, do you?
I did have a chance to scale this, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it looked like they were close to 8 or 9 feet.
Yeah, those
based
there
on
are about
center.
8 or 9
So
feet
if we
apart.
double them up.
If we just take a few of them from the east side there, slide them around to the front, and also we need to slide them to the west. You want them, further to the west. Also, in her comment, almost over to the pear tree, and we don't want them right under the pear tree, but almost over to the pear tree, and then go the 4 foot on center all the way to the east property line. That's what we were intending on doing, and then just have that be a mulch bed there, and then sod back around the back of, to the back side of the dumpster enclosure.
So that pear tree, is it a single stem tree or is it a multi-stem?
It's a one trunk tree.
Okay, so you can slide it to the west. I'm not a fan of pulling them all off of that east side and throwing them in there. I think you're putting too many of them in there if you do that. And I don't like losing all the greenery against that brick. I mean, I think if you threw 2 more in between what you have there, you'd be fine.
I wasn't going to move them all. I was just going to move the number, the 2 or 3, plus or minus, that we needed to move over there. Basically, what my point is we calculated based on the road frontage what they say we're supposed to have in there, and that's how many we have there. And so I didn't think that we should have to add more. But if you insist that we add more, we will. But we've added many plantings on the whole site that aren't required, the optional ones around the menu board and the clearance bar. Those were all optional. We had them as dailies. You asked us to change them to wintergreen boxwoods. We changed them. I'm just saying we're trying to work with you, but we would like to be reasonable.
Well, I have a thought. I wish I had a laser pointer here.
Yeah, I got one right
You
here.
got one?
I think you guys are talking about the same thing.
I think somewhat we are. Is this one working here? Okay. I think if you look at the Hartland Square plan development and look at the landscaping, all their hedgerows are a true straight line hedgerow. So if we took these 3 off of here and pulled them up here, bring the sod up to wherever you need to bring it, straighten these out in a single row, and just came around in an L shape, I'm not sure you're adding any more. You're just shuffling what you got.
I agree.
But I think a hedgerow is either you got to plant them all a double row, or you need to put them in one single line.
Okay.
And I think if we look at the pattern that's been set in the development itself, they're rows. They're single rows of shrubbery versus this alternating type pattern that's going on. So you pick up the sod, you maybe haven't even added another shrub.
Yeah, we can do that. That works well.
So is what I'm hearing, at least the suggestion on the table is, rather than the staggered use, the straight line and closer together, and in doing so, probably keep the same quantity of species.
I think you will, because I think you can knock these 3 to the front. Take these 3 out of here and move them up front here to fill this in a little bit, and bring the sod up. Just keep the sod coming up to here, wherever it needs to go. And then just knock these 3 here that are closest to the property line in line with the 2 that are backing the dumpster enclosure, and you filled it in, and you've got a row now.
It's no problem, we can do that.
And you haven't added a bush, you haven't added a shrub.
We can do that, yep.
And you'll probably end up having to throw grass along there.
Yeah, and that's exactly, that'll be sodded, yes.
Right.
So what about that little sliver thing there?
What we would like to do with the little sliver is just put concrete over it. The problem, we thought it was better with the mulch originally, but we believe that it's just an area, it's just not going to be conducive to growing anything, so let's just put concrete over it and take care of the problem. And it's just a little, I don't want to put grass there because it's hard to maintain, and so we'll just concrete it. If that.
I would agree.
Yeah.
It's a sliver. Just put some cement on it.
I was going to make.
I got just a curiosity question. Why is that right angle in that part of the parking lot anyway? Why wouldn't you smooth that out?
That is so trucks can make the turn. We have our delivery truck. Our delivery truck comes in the entrance and it goes through the drive-through lane to get out because we have to keep it on our property and it can't back out onto. And so it goes and then it just does a real sharp turn to the back end. It doesn't hit the building or the corner there.
Okay. Does that solve the dumpster area for everyone? You good with it? Okay, I have a question for you right on these 3 that you moved over here. If we're doing them as a hedgerow, kind of growing them together, there's grass between them. It's not really
Well, I noticed that. I didn't notice it when we submitted it, but with that we'll have a mulch bed around it.
Okay.
And we'll put them at 4 feet on center.
No. Is that all that Sue had to say?
I'll read through this again real quick. The answer is no. The other thing she brought up, and it's a good point, so these plantings that are required along M59 have already been planted by the developer when the overall development went in. And one of Sue's recommended conditions of approval, if the Planning Commission does decide to go that way this evening, and I think it's a good condition, would be to, in the springtime or sometime once we get into the growing season, verify that these planting are still in viable, living, growing condition, and if they are not, it would be on the applicant to replace whatever isn't surviving, since they would otherwise be required to put in these plantings anyway.
Is that because she's concerned about damage from construction? Or?
There's some that are dead.
I think just overall along here there are some plantings that some are doing better than others, and now would be the opportunity to replace the ones that haven't made it.
Is that area irrigated already?
It's not irrigated now, but it will be when Sundance will irrigate. Oh, is it? Okay.
I think that's a reasonable thing to get those.
So the daylily, filling in some of the mulch beds with daylilies was one of her comments. I know it sounds like we've got a plan of attack for the hedgerows, and I know that's one of the things she wanted to see addressed.
If I could make a comment on that, her concern, I think, as I read it, and of course I'm filtering it through my eyes, is that she didn't want any of the mulch beds. Just we had a lot of mulch bed, extra mulch bed that had no plantings in it. So she at one point in her letter, she said either reduce the size of the mulch bed or plant it with something. And so what we would like to do is basically where we have groups of plants, and I'll get away from the microphone here and point to my drawing real quick and show you what I mean. But what we'd like to do. I'll do both here. What we would like to do, like in this area here, is just stop the mulch bed right on the edge of the plantings on both sides, so it would be sod right up in the corner there. Do the same thing here. So wherever we break the plantings, break the mulch bed and put sod between, if that makes sense. So I believe, her concern was is that we have those open areas, and so there would be planting groups instead of a whole line. That would be, and actually, when I redlined this for my engineering check, that's the way I redlined it, but I guess it was easier to draw it this way. So that's what we would suggest to do in that area. And then also not have the mulch bed go under the pear tree, just have it stop right here under, outside of the pear tree. So that would all be sod under the pear tree. Same way with this pear tree up here. When we make the adjustments to one line of plantings here, the mulch bed will thin up there, be sod and mulch bed. We'll stop the mulch bed from going underneath the pear tree. So I think we won't have a whole bunch of extra mulch bed out there with no plantings in it.
What about around the
mulch bed? Pardon?
What about around the transformer?
Around the transformer, we'll cut that. We'll cut that so that the mulch bed goes right back to the building. We want to have the mulch between the building and the transformer, just to make it easier to access the transformer. But we'll cut that off. That little triangle will be sod right in there. So that's what we'd like to propose.
So, based on Sue's comments, I'll read verbatim. Overall comment is to reduce the amount of bare mulch beds, and then she gets more specific about where she sees the opportunity to do so. I would think that if the Planning Commission thinks a way to do so is to replace some mulch with some sodded areas, that seemingly satisfies the intent.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that. I think that's a good idea.
I'd rather see that than add some daylilies into the large beds that we have, personally.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with either way. My only wonder would be is that cutting and adding some of the little strips of grass would seem to be more difficult for your grass person to maintain than anything else, but that's your applicant's cost, not mine, so.
Okay. Have we hit all the landscaping comments, Dave? I think so.
I think so, too.
Okay, so when we get to the end of the evening here, we'll have to make sure some of those notes are included in our motion. Next up would be item 3, determination by the Planning Commission of whether the illuminated lavender element of the south and west elevations is acceptable and consistent with the spirit of the pattern book. Any comments?
Well, I didn't get a chance to go see it, so I do have the additional photos here, so...
Well, there's been some additional discussion. I did go take a look at it. I know Larry Hopkins took a look at it. Dave, do you want to...
Sure. So just a quick overview. On the proposed south elevation and on the proposed west elevation, there's this system of bronze slats with glazed masonry behind it. And on the back sides of some of these bronze slats is a LED lighting system that when it illuminates at night, it kind of it reflects off of that glazed lavender and creates kind of a purple glow. The intent to look something like this. This is a store out of state somewhere where they grow palm trees. So the nearest store to Hartland Township that has this new prototype from Taco Bell, and I need to switch, so bear with me, is in Romulus, and it's actually owned by the same owner who's proposing to build a store here in Hartland. 2 sets of pictures were sent from that Romulus store, just to give, for the benefit of the Planning Commission, kind of a real-world view of what the final result is. Now, depending on the type of camera and the camera settings and whatever else, these were the pictures that were emailed to me from the owner of This would be the front of the Romulus store, and then this is the front again, but around the corner some. And then our Planning Commission chair took a ride down there as well and took these pictures. Obviously some differences in the exposure and the camera, but you can see the lighting shining through the gaps in the slats as it's intended to do, and kind of creating that purple glow through. But at the same time, casting some light on the brick above the slats on the side and also on the front. And I know there was some discussion amongst members of the Planning Commission, some thoughts amongst members of the Planning Commission on the illumination of the Romulus store and how we would want to see that compared to a potential store here in Hartland.
Well, there are differences in the photo. We probably both think ours are the most like what it really is, but I think it's something we can work with. Using the photos that I took there, as bright as that would appear, I didn't find the light coming through the slats to be the issue. It wasn't the issue. The issue for me personally, having done all the site plans with you guys around here, was that light coming out the top. And because the light coming out the top was quite a bit. And were there opportunities to work with the lighting coming out the top, allowing the architectural feature to remain and be lit. So, Larry,
we've already taken those other lights, there,
yes,
and made them downward facing only, right?
Yes.
Per our ordinance, so I think that would probably bode well to see what we can do with the other ones.
So my observations, Larry and I drove out there yesterday evening, and I was pleasantly surprised in some ways, because when I saw these pictures, I was very concerned about the light behind those slat walls even, because to me, I don't even see purple behind those slat walls. But when you're on that site, it does create a purple hue, which is, as Chairman Fox said, an acceptable thing. The light above the band is the only concern I have. And I think, we got out of the vehicle and we went up there and freaked out the people working at Taco Bell, walking around their store. But so we got up against that glass and kind of looked at how it was being lit. And my suggestion would be, you've got to shield that light coming up somehow. And in that structure, there's two horizontal tubes, metal tubes, that are somehow involved in that whole structure being attached to that building. And on the bottom, the lights are mounted above that tube. So that tube shields the light coming down. And if you look at the brick below the structure versus the brick above the structure, you can see the difference. The one at the top, those light fixtures are mounted on the back of that top horizontal member. Somewhere shortly below that horizontal member is another one of those horizontal structural tubes. That if that row of light was below that horizontal tube, you'd get the same effect above the structure as you do below, and I think everything's fine then.
Yeah, and we agree with you. Just to give you a little background of what happened here, the manufacturer, the slat wall, manufactured everything to go all the way to the top of the parapet. They didn't look at the architectural drawings. They apparently looked at the corporate standard, which goes all the way to the top. And so the contractor had to retrofit out there to cut the frames off and then lower everything down and only put the appropriate amount of slat wall. So I suspect during that operation that the light mounted where it was, if the slat was going to go all the way up to the top, would have been okay. It wasn't, and so we will for the Hartland Taco Bell, that light will be lowered below that bar, as you suggested. And just a comment. I talked to Rick Eccles today, and he is just very appreciative of both Chairperson Fox and Clerk Hopkins for spending the time to go out there and take a look at it and not just say, oh, this is terrible. I mean, you did something about it. And that is very, very much appreciated. And we're very thankful that you looked at it and figured out what was wrong. I haven't been to the store. As I say, I was going to go on Sunday, and I stopped because of the snow. So, but that being said, the lights will be lowered down, and then if that doesn't solve it, they'll cap it. So we will not allow the light to violate the ordinance.
And I think, having seen it, for those that haven't, I really think that's going to fix it. If you go and look at the structure itself, it's obvious the difference between the top and the bottom of the structure, and the light coming out the bottom is fine. It's a little heavy on the top. To let him know how closely we examined it and all, he might want to know that the lowest level of LED lighting on the front of the store is not even wired. The bare wires are just coming out of the building, hanging, and the row of lighting is hanging. Nobody finished it. And if you look at the store, you'll see how dark it is.
Yeah,
it's not hooked up yet.
Yeah. It's a work in progress. They were, I think it got. I forget when it got partly wired, but I think the weather has kept them from finishing it up. So, and they have to work around the store being open, everything too. So.
I personally think if you could take care of that
we will take care of that.
That would do it. Comments?
And there's no slat wall on the drive-through side.
I think there's just a little piece. Let me show you. It's really not a slat wall, but right above the windows there's two pieces that are supposed to be there. I don't know if they were put in yet, but they're not lighted.
Actually,
so they're just slats.
Yeah, they have a couple more than two.
And what happened is the manufacturer, if you look at the corporate prototype, they have 3 rows that stick out further. Yeah. And they only have 2 here. They manufactured it all with the 3 rows, so they had to modify the whole frame to only put 2 down below. And they made. I did notice that in the one picture that we had. This had 3 rows on it instead of 2. It was only supposed to have 2, but I guess they.
And the other thing I just want to verify, on their drive-through, they have another Taco Bell logo. We're not getting one of.
No, that was. We had to apply for a variance in Romulus, and they granted a variance for the signage. And actually, they would have only allowed signage on the front of the building. On the Wayne Road side of it. They wouldn't allow it on the walk-up side or the drive-through side, but we applied for a variance and were approved for that extra signage. And we're not proposing that in Hartland.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the lavender architectural element?
No, it was hard for me to first because all the different pictures have all different exposures, but if you use the same reference in each picture, and that's the bell, you can kind of get an idea of the brightness, because that exposure changes as well. So the purple background or the lighting there, the architectural lighting is all less than or pretty close to the bell. So it's a lot dimmer than it first appeared when they first presented it.
Yeah. Okay. Item 4, resolution of outstanding items noted in the DPW Director, Fire Marshal, and Township Engineer on the construction side. I think you've already agreed to most of
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
And in fact, we today got confirmation that the DPW Director's comments have been addressed with the transfer of water and sewer RUs. So they're actively addressing those comments.
Okay.
And they submitted today a land division application to create a separate parcel for the Taco Bell.
Okay. Anybody have any additional questions or comments on this project? Do you have any questions for us?
No questions.
Okay. If not, I believe we're ready to entertain a motion.
If you do choose to do so, I do want to point out that I provided some recommended motion language, but I noted that the date within that recommended motion language that I cite for the date of our review letter, I used January 2nd, and then the letter obviously got updated, but not within that recommended motion language. So if you do choose to use my recommended motion language, please cite the review letter of January 6th, not January 2nd. I apologize for the oversight.
I mean, so my question is, do we really need those? I mean, didn't we just discuss that, how he's going to handle those? Do we still need to, I mean, we accepted the lights as he's presented, right?
Yeah, yes, I would say that the only one that still has some conditions to address would be number, directly or indirectly, number 2, as it pertains to landscaping.
Yeah, except that your letter doesn't address what we just talked about.
That's true. So that'll be the additional comments of this evening's meeting.
Including capping of the...
Cap on top of the slabs, lights, right? Somehow.
Yeah.
And any replacement of any species, existing species along the M59
Yeah.
landscaping area that did.
So I'll move to recommend approval of site plan for Taco Bell within Hartland Town Square Plan Development, site plan application number 520, subject to the following. That the applicant address the landscape issues addressed tonight by rearranging the plantings around the dumpster, replacing any unhealthy or dead plantings along the M59 frontage, and reducing the mulch beds around the areas discussed tonight. And the provision that the lighting behind the slat wall be adjusted as discussed tonight, and
Or capped.
or capped.
I'll second that.
Okay. We have a motion to recommend approval from Commissioner Hopkins and a second from Commissioner Voigt. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
when do you plan on being open?
I never checked what the schedule is, but we've been told once we get site plan approval, we're going to turn right around and get our engineering drawings in, which typically means he'd probably like to construct this year. And I don't know for sure the timing.
Well, we can't welcome them to Hartland since they're already here, but we're glad they're building a new facility. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next up on our agenda would be item 9B, zoning ordinance amendment application number 356. We've had a few of these over the last few months, and I think probably the best thing to do is turn this over to Dave and have him guide us through this agenda item.
Thanks again. So, as Mr. Fox mentioned, this is our third go-around in this process. A very quick reminder, as I've done a few times, we had approximately 30 zoning ordinance amendments that we wanted to see addressed this year. We divided them into rounds of approximately 10, and therefore there's 3 rounds. Rounds 1 and 2 have since been through the Planning Commission, public hearing, and adopted by the Township Board, and are now effective. This is now round 3. The 9 amendments that are included in round 3 have been before the Ordinance Review Committee in a series of 2 meetings. We had one meeting where we looked at the first 5 and a second meeting where we looked at the other 4. The Ordinance Review Committee was generally favorable toward the approach where the Planning Department staff was looking to take. the Planning Commission has already set a public hearing for the January 23rd Planning Commission meeting in 2 weeks. And so my intent in putting it on the agenda this evening was to have an opportunity, if the Planning Commission so wishes, to discuss these and answer any questions or make any revisions deemed necessary leading up to the public hearing in 2 weeks. My thought was to go through them, you can figure out where I am here, go through them relatively briefly and give you an opportunity to jump in if you have any specific questions as we go through them one by one. So I mentioned there are 9 within the application package. There's 76-4, letters A through I. Letter A is intended to address... let me back up for one quick second. So there's an overall cover memo that addresses the whole package, and then each of the amendments has its own specific cover memo. Letter A addresses an issue that we've been working on for some time, and that is currently the zoning ordinance in certain sections requires that setback requirements be met not only from a road, but from a easement, and it doesn't necessarily say road easement. And so there's been some issues that have made it all the way to the ZBA where an applicant has been required to meet a front setback requirement relative to a utility easement or a conservation easement, and what the ZBA and I think the Planning Commission agreed was that it's not necessarily the intent. So zoning amendment A is designed to address that issue so that we're no longer requiring front setback requirements relative to an easement other than a private road easement or a shared driveway easement. And along with that, there's some clarification with the definition of a street, so that a street could reference both a public or a private street. Right now, it references only public, and that can prove problematic where the word street is referenced throughout the ordinance. Any questions specific to letter A?
So, most of the thing that perks my ears up the most is the other easements part, because that's been the bugaboo thing. And so that hinges on the word road being added in 139A.
Among other locations, but yes, adding the provision of a road easement.
Because the other ones all are talking about street, so I don't see that anything in those lifts that burden off of the utility easements or conservation easements.
That's true. And where the hang-up, and keep in mind, too, that a good portion of this was addressed as part of the clear zoning reformatting. Along that process, there was some cleanup that was done with this issue along the way there. And this is essentially kind of the last step in getting this finally resolved. But in particular, where we define a front lot line, the fact that it currently says relative to a shared driveway right-of-way or recorded easement. Well, a recorded easement could be a utility easement, conservation easement. And by adding the word road relative to the front lot line solves a lot of issues, because that's where the issues were coming up, is the front setback requirement relative to an easement that oftentimes runs along the side of your property. So now you're having to meet the front lot setback requirement along an easement on your side, and I don't think that was the intent. So this was the last step in addressing that.
So then my other question on this one is in 241 Street. So you read that any vehicular way that, and then 1, 2, so basically you should be able to pick up that sentence at any one of those, right? They don't build upon each other, each one.
No, they should all stand alone.
Right. So I'm not sure if, and I know some of this gets picky, but this is usually the way we do this. Is the word other correct in number 3? Shouldn't it just read is approved by official action?
Let me read that and... Yeah, I would agree with that.
I have one to ask also.
I would be inclined to remove the word other, so that it simply says any vehicular way that 3 is approved by official action.
My question is, since the 3 can stand alone, the 3, 1, 2, and 3 can stand alone, it's or, and or. We've got an or between 2 and 3. Should we have an or between 1 and 2?
Probably. That is 1. Yes.
Okay. And then on 3, we need to add the second, the quotation mark after road at the very end.
Yep.
It is picky. I'm going to recommend approval. It's going to be...
Yeah, I thought the word other was picky. Quotation marks.
Anything else on letter A? Letter B is related, and it has to do with a change that was made that maybe had some unforeseen intent and causes conflicts with another section of the ordinance. A new definition was implemented for the definition of frontage for through and corner lots. And a sentence was added saying if a lot has frontage on more than one road, frontage on one road only may be used to satisfy the minimum lot frontage. But in making that change, it created a conflict with sections 372 and 373 of the ordinance, which essentially say the opposite. The recommendation of the Planning Department is to remove that second sentence in the definition for frontage through and corner lots, which is logical when you think of, if we're looking at a land division that has frontage on, let's say, a public road on one side and a private road on another side, so it's a corner lot. It wouldn't be a good practice to allow it to only maintain the minimum lot frontage on one of the two roads, because that has the potential to create a lot of with dimensions, because you would still have to meet the front setback requirement from both roads, as we just talked about in the last proposed amendment. So now, by allowing a lot to develop that meets the minimum lot width on only one side, you're really limiting the buildable area of that lot, and you're creating the potential for some hardships for folks that, when we're looking at land divisions, we wouldn't want to create. So by taking out that second sentence, we're eliminating that potential, plus we're eliminating that conflict that now exists between this definition and this section of the ordinance in 372 and 373. So the recommendation is to eliminate that second sentence and have it simply say that for a through and corner lot, all sides of a lot that abut a public or private road shall be considered frontage, which is now consistent with 372 and 373. Questions on that one?
Yeah, on the first page of that memo, 3.7.2, you've got corner and double frontage lots which butt on more than one private road or easement. Using the word easement there doesn't cause any conflict like what we just tried to resolve in the previous amendment?
If you'll buy it, well, I shouldn't say it that way. If you would agree, the key word there is such. Abut public road or private road shall provide the required front yards along every such road or easement. So the such ties it back to the private road. Having said that, I see no harm in throwing the word every such road or road easement to further clarify that. We did look at that one. Keep in mind, that's the existing language now, and our thought was that the word such is the key there.
Every, et cetera. I'd be more,
You could add the word.
yeah, I think we should throw the word road.
Yeah, for consistency, you might as well.
Easy.
Now's the time to do it.
Yep. Anything else on that one? Letter C is one that we came up in a prior amendment where we were talking about shared commercial driveways, and the question came up, do we actually have a definition for a shared commercial driveway? And at the time, the answer was no, and the response was, well, we need one as part of this process of amending the zoning ordinance, and so that is what we propose to add within our definition section. This is a definition not only for a commercial driveway, but also a shared commercial driveway. Questions on that one? Moving on to D. So D has to do with the Right to Farm Act and a comment that came from the clear zoning consultant of whether our existing language as it pertains to farms and keeping of animals is consistent with the Right to Farm Act and recent case law and appeals. And the answer is it would be impossible to try to continually update and amend the zoning ordinance to keep it up to date with the standards and provisions of the Right to Farm Act and the generally accepted agricultural management practices that are cited within the Right to Farm Act. GAMPs, they're called, Generally Accepted Agricultural Management Practices. Those GAMPs are constantly being updated by the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. And the Right to Farm Act is consistently being challenged and case law is consistently being established such that the Right to Farm Act is something of a moving target. And the GAMPs are, as I said, always evolving and changing and therefore a moving target as well. So to cover ourselves with the Right to Farm Act, the recommendation of the Planning Department, after discussion with the Ordinance Review Committee, is to, within the sections of the ordinance where we currently cite the Right to Farm Act or sections of the ordinance that could potentially be superseded by the Right to Farm Act, we acknowledge as such. So, for example, in our Keeping of Animals section, we say, unless superseded by the Right to Farm Act as amended. Same goes for our standards for farms, unless superseded by the Right to Farm Act. Because again, for example, if we were to put in our zoning ordinance that a manure storage pile has to be so many feet from a neighboring property line, based on a requirement that's already a GAMP, a Generally Accepted Management Practice. Well, then that Generally Accepted Management Practice could easily get changed in 1 year, 5 years, and then we're having to go back and amend the zoning ordinance to keep it consistent with the GAMPs. And that would it would be a constant battle. So rather than trying to do it that way, our thought was to simply state, unless otherwise superseded by the Right to Farm Act.
I have a question for you. Having not read the public hearing notice for the meeting and how they're put together, do you call out each section that we're amending? And are we, well, that's the first question. Do you have to call out 4.27?
You have to summarize what the amendment is.
Okay.
And it would be lengthy, and it would create, we'd take up a whole page of the newspaper, or, a large section of the newspaper. We try to cite every individual section that we're amending.
Okay.
So the answer is we do not. We create a summary.
That's fine. We were adding 4.10. If you had advertised 4.27 and all of a sudden you guys decided to do 4.10, are we still okay with our public hearing notice?
We are.
Okay. That's really the question.
Any questions on that one? Included with the packet is, just to give you an example of how, I don't know what the word would be, how confusing the Right to Farm Act can get. We included this kind of a decision tree map that was developed by the Michigan State Extension. And you can see how a lot of these right to farm issues can go in any different way. But ultimately, it's governed by the Michigan Department of Agriculture. And the Right to Farm Act and the GAMPs supersede local ordinances. And that's what our ordinance is we're proposing to update to acknowledge that. Letter E has to do with a kind of a duplicative language. We've got language within Section 5.8 of how to, saying that if a parking lot has been approved and it's under construction, and then in the meantime the zoning ordinance somehow changes such that it changes the parking requirements for that parking lot that's already under construction, the parking lot that was approved per the old ordinance still stands. And having that language there within the parking section begs the question, well, should that same comparable language be included with every section of the zoning ordinance as it pertains to lighting and landscaping and building design and building materials? You know, if the zoning ordinance changes when you're halfway through construction, are you still covered by the site plan that's already been approved? The answer is yes, and we've already got language in the zoning ordinance that says as much. So having this extra language within the parking section is duplicative and potentially confusing because, as I said, it begs the question, why isn't that same language carried throughout other sections? So the recommendation is to eliminate that. Any questions on that? Amendment F has to do with addressing the comment from the consultant of whether the language as it pertains to sidewalks and pathways is adequate and is clear with its intent and its requirements. And we felt that it could be consolidated to make it more easy to interpret. And the way we do that is, rather than try to include this language of a sidewalk or pathway has to be within 1 foot of the right-of-way unless there's planned right-of-way, in which case it has to be 1 foot inside of the planned right-of-way, we propose to eliminate that and just say it has to be within 1 foot of the planned right-of-way, whether that's the established right-of-way or if there is a planned right-of-way. It has to be 1 foot inside of that. If there is no planned right-of-way beyond the established right-of-way, then that then by default is the planned right-of-way. So that was how we looked to address that issue. Questions on that? Hearing none. Moving on to G. Remind myself. This is somewhat comparable to the parking one that we covered just a minute ago. There's language within our requirements as they pertain to noise violations that say if you want to appeal the noise standards, here's how you do it. But again, if you're going to include that language in that section, then there really should be an appeals procedure in every section of the zoning ordinance. And we don't think that's necessary. We think that because we already have a whole section of our zoning ordinance that has to do with appealing the provisions of the zoning ordinance, that we don't need to have specific language for noise. That just like any other variance to the zoning ordinance, there is an entire chapter of the ordinance that covers that. So our suggestion is to remove that duplicative language for clarity and conciseness. Moving on to H. Again, duplicative language having to do with a non-conforming mineral extraction. Essentially, there's two sections of the ordinance in Chapter 7 and in Chapter 5 that say the same thing, and the recommendation is to remove the language that's contained within Chapter 7 because it's almost verbatim to what's already included in Chapter 5, which is the more appropriate place for it to be. and to eliminate it almost in its entirety within Chapter 7, other than to add a reference back to Section 5.19. Questions on that one? Letter I is a big one in the sense that this is where the site plan approval for a site plan for a principal permitted use, which currently has to go to the Township Board for final approval, such as the Taco Bell tonight. The Taco Bell still has to go to the Township Board for final approval. This amendment would change the procedure such that this body, the Township Planning Commission, would have the authority to approve a site plan for a principal permitted use, not for things that require an extra degree of scrutiny, such as a plan development or special land use or rezoning, or some of those things that have to go to the Township Board either by state statute or just because they require that extra level of scrutiny because of the scope and the scale of the project. But, for example, if we're talking about a new retail building in our general commercial district that otherwise meets all the requirements of the zoning ordinance and is a principal permitted use in that zoning district, if this amendment were to be adopted, that site plan could be approved by the Planning Commission without taking that extra step to the Township Board. My understanding is this is something that the Township Board has wanted to see happen for a little bit of time now. There's a good working relationship between the Planning Commission and the Board, and the feeling of the Board is that the Planning Commission is more than capable of reviewing and approving these site plans. And so this amendment touches a lot of sections to make that happen, but that is the intent.
So David, just can foresee a question from the board. Say the Planning Commission will deny a site plan. Is there any appeal remedy for somebody, or is that it?
No, and in fact, so that's an interesting question that I've actually discussed with the township attorney. The answer is because at his recommendation we included this language, site plan action. So the decision of the Planning Commission shall be final. That comes with being the final approval authority, is that there isn't an appeal process, whether it be taking it to the Township Board or to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And the Township Attorney stated that so long as that's clearly stated in the zoning ordinance, then it can hold up if it were to be challenged in court.
So it could not go to the ZBA?
It could not. Right now, the way the zoning ordinance, this actually covers an issue that we have with the zoning ordinance now, because the zoning ordinance currently is relatively unclear if a site plan were to currently go to the Township Board and get denied, could the applicant then appeal that denial to the ZBA? The zoning ordinance doesn't specifically say right now whether it can or cannot. But the recommendation of the Township Attorney is if you're going to be amending the sections that have to do with the approval process, we should include that language so that, for instance, with site plans at the top of page 2, the decision of the Planning Commission shall be final. Moving down on that page, you'll notice, as we're talking about, I believe this has to do with special land uses. Again, the decision of the Township Board for such an application shall be final. So it's the recommendation of the attorney to add that language so that there no longer is this ambiguity about can you or can you not appeal a decision of the approving body back to the ZBA.
Would the board be comfortable with that, Larry, you think? I don't know.
The only concern that I have is that the only appeal process they would have is to see in court. Or if they had an option of either CBA or another body like the board listening to it. So that's the decision that, it might keep us out of as another checks and balance here in the township, we could control it better, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, if you trust them, do you trust them, or do you have to leave yourself an ability to overrule them, kind of thing, So if the result is going to court, you're just going to court, maybe a couple of weeks earlier. The way...
Well, that's true. That's a good point, I guess.
So...
It's. I will say that it's certainly not unusual in townships and cities around Southeast Michigan for site plans to get approved at the Planning Commission level. So we're not necessarily breaking new ground here. When I say that the attorney wanted that language about the decision shall be final, I think that was more intended to not allow a site plan to get appealed to the ZBA. You could argue, though, that if they do have the option to appeal to the board, that somehow, that in some ways undermines what we're trying to accomplish here, and undermines I suppose, the trust that the board is showing in the Planning Commission by wanting this amendment to begin with.
I agree with what you're saying. I wouldn't mind you asking that question of the attorney, just, does he have, if the board's feeling is that they would like the ability for people that have gotten a denial for site plan at Planning Commission to appeal to the board, does he see problems with that? Just in case the board asks the question.
Okay.
So that we just have the answer before,
Let me ask this, and maybe this is one where you might want to chew on the answer a little bit. Is that something, if it were up to the Planning Commission, is that an option that you would want the applicant to have? Would you want them to have the option to appeal your decision, and most likely a denial, to the township board? And maybe that's one that, again, requires some thought. Do you want them to have that last resort option of an appeal?
Well, let me ask you this question. If the relationship between the Planning Commission and the board continues on the path that it's been for the last 10 years, there probably isn't going to be a different decision rendered.
Right.
Now, should that change at some point in time in the future, the board has the opportunity to change the zoning ordinance without even if the Planning Commission doesn't like it.
Yes.
They could take that away.
Yes.
If they feel that they've got this little rogue group of people here that aren't doing what they should be doing, that board at that time could change that. No, that doesn't mean somebody coming in next week isn't going to present something that we don't like. But it's not forever, I guess is what I'm saying.
True. So I've got a few changes to make and some questions to ask, but I don't see anything that would preclude this from proceeding to a public hearing on the 23rd, at which time you'll have an option to make a recommendation or to ask for further study. I'm not looking for any formal action tonight. It would need to be after we hold the public hearing in 2 weeks.
And just for anybody here or watching at home, the reason there wasn't a lot of discussion is these issues have been brought up for a long time, so they've been dealt with as single issues over the years, and we've already given direction, and we have a subcommittee that actually worked with the planning director to put those recommendations that were just presented to us tonight. So there weren't a lot of surprises here. It has been around for quite some time, so we're all pretty familiar with them. It was just getting the I's dotted and T's crossed on some of the wording. So is that is for the 9B zoning ordinance amendment, Dave?
It is.
Anything else?
We made it all the way through.
Okay. Item 10, call to the public. Anybody want to say anything? No? Item 11 is the planner's report. Dave?
So I'd like to welcome our new Planning Commission member, Mr. Murphy. This is his first meeting this evening, and hope we didn't do anything to scare him off too badly. Another reminder, even if I've already said it 10 times, we will be having a public hearing in 2 weeks for the zoning ordinance amendments that we just covered. Yesterday evening, the Safer Roads and Pathways Task Force had their third meeting, where they're presented with a list of potential projects, improvement projects for our paved roads, our gravel roads, our pathways, and then another list of projects that we deemed other. And they had an opportunity to see what's most of those costs and prioritize them, and talking about funding options. This is the next step toward that group working with staff to develop a Safer Roads and Pathways plan. We hope to have a rough draft of that plan early February. So stay tuned for that, and the Planning Commission will certainly be plugged into that as that plan develops early this year. The Township Board at their last meeting approved the strategic plan for 2014, and a number of the items on there will involve input from the Planning Commission, including a update to the comprehensive plan, a parks master plan, and some amendments to these sign regulations within the zoning ordinance. I've mentioned what some of those are, or potentially may be. So those are things that you'll all be involved with, and certainly more to come on those. And I believe that's all I had on my short list of things to report to you this evening.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Item 12, committee reports.
I just had a question. As far as goals, when you guys, have you talked about when we're going to do our yearly goal setting?
We were scheduled to do that on our snow day this week. It will be coming in the near future.
It will be. It's not something that's fallen off my radar. I was wanting to get the strategic plan firmed up with the board, because that will certainly play a role in what the goals of the Planning Commission will be. Another thing we have to do here shortly, probably at the next meeting, is review and approve the bylaws, or update them if necessary. So I will likely put that on the next agenda.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
I just wanted to also give a thank you to Kelly Summerfield, who is no longer on the Planning Commission. And between him resigning, we didn't have a meeting that he attended, so we could thank him in person. But thank him for the time that he spent with us and helped us along the way.
I believe he got a little tribute from the Township Board, did he not, Larry?
Yep.
Okay. Anything else, anyone? If not, I need a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, and we're done. Good night.